Thank you. Great. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That was an introduction only a mother could love, so I apologize if I'm a terrible letdown after that. We have a tremendous panel on reinventing sustenance. I'm going to invite my panelists to come out in the sake of efficiency. As you know, we're heading towards a world of 9 billion plus people, one in which, as we've heard from previous panelists, we're going to see quite a lot of disruptive impacts of climate change, the energy and water implications of how we feed the world all come to the fore. And to think us through in just 23 minutes what this means and how do we get to solutions, I'm delighted to introduce a terrific panel. We have first from UC Davis, Raoul Adamchak. We have Fred Pearce of The New Scientist, and Prabhu Pingali from the Gates Foundation. Before I turn to our speakers, I thought it would be fun to do a quick straw poll of the audience. I'm not sure if I'm allowed, David, but what the heck. Any discussion I've gotten into, including an animated one at lunch that I had with Amory Lovins, inevitably and quickly turns to GMOs and organic. And so I thought, let's put our cards on the table. I'm going to ask you two questions, and these are forced responses. So please, you must say yes or no. And go along with it. You know, it's not scientific, but it'll give us a sense of the audience. And the questions may not be perfect, but here's the first question. Do you believe that GMOs, genetically modified food, will play an important role in the food security of the future? And this is a yes or no question. You must vote one way or the other. OK, how many say no? OK, a very small smattering, maybe 80. No, I just wanted to let people know about the forced vote. OK, a similar question. How many of you believe that organic farming will play an important role in meeting the food security needs of the future? How many of you say no? OK, so a stronger no. It was 95% pro-GMO, a more mixed response, actually, maybe 70-30 or even stronger in favor of organic, 35%. So great, just to get a mood of the room, let me turn to a gentleman who has a unique perspective on this. Aside from being an expert in the area and an expert in organic farming, he's married to a plant geneticist, so he has very interesting dinner table conversations. So Raoul, tell us, how do we think about this question as we think about the challenges ahead? Do you see these two opposed, as some people do, or is there a way to harmoniously integrate them into a Zen future?
Well, I hope there's a harmonious way because our marriage has to stay together. We're working on it. Pam and I have taken a problem-centered point of view. We look at the agricultural system of the world, and we look at the problems out there, and not only the problems of agriculture in terms of erosion or environmental contamination due to pesticide use and fertilizer use, but also the problems of an increasing population and global warming. Global warming is going to impact agriculture a great deal around the world. So when we look at the problem, then we can start to envision what the solution to the problem is going to be. And we've sat down and established criteria for what a sustainable agriculture would be that would solve a lot of these problems. And sometimes we think that the problems can be solved using organic farming solutions, and sometimes it's most appropriate to solve a problem using genetically engineered crops. And there are examples in the world of both. But in the long run, it seems like if we want to have a ecologically based, environmentally friendly agriculture, then we need to integrate some of the practices used in organic farming. But if we want to also solve some of those pest problems and problems of toxins in the environment, then genetically engineered crops are going to give us an advantage in doing that.
I know you'd like to talk about the viability of farmers and rural communities as one of the things that's important to you. Is there an inherent tension, at least, if not conflict, in talking about these two things you advocate? One of the arguments in favor of dealing with the food question in the future is to move towards scale, towards efficiency, towards higher yield, toward intensification. I think we might hear a little bit from Prabhu about the need for this in parts of Africa. Is organic farming consistent with that idea?
It is if you're depending on what problem you're trying to solve. So if the problem is soil degradation and a lack of nitrogen fertilizer, then there are practices like cover crops or the use of agricultural wastes or urban wastes to solve that problem. But if the problem is blight of bananas that's wiping out the banana crop, then it could be that genetic engineering provides the solution even for the smallholder. So there are opportunities for smallholders, there are opportunity for industrial farms to improve their agricultural systems. But there's so much diversity in agriculture, and I think that's what makes it especially challenging.
So you're talking about having multiple tools in the toolkit.
Multiple tools in the toolkit.
Okay. Fred, let's turn to you. In your writings, I know certainly you have a great concern about climate change and environmental issues, some of the water issues. We all know that agriculture is the greatest user of fresh water. When you look at this question, as we enter a world with greater concerns about climate change, how do you look at the food problem? I mean, we have enough food to feed people on Earth, in fact, in surplus, don't we? So it's not really about the quantity of food.
We have enough food to feed 10 billion people now, but
Indeed.
The problem is half of the grain we feed to livestock, which is a pretty inefficient way of feeding people ultimately, or we use it for biofuels.
Yeah.
So in terms of actually how much we grow enough to feed 10 billion people already. It seems to me where we are now is not as scary as where we were in the 1960s. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, and as a school kid, remembering hearing the world population is going to double in 30 years, in a generation. How can we double food production? And it didn't seem possible. In fact, we did it.
Right.
The Green Revolution did it. Now, that really was a transformation of agriculture. Now, there's a downside to that. We doubled food production, but inputs for those crops were they were very resource-intensive crops. So water, something I've looked at quite a lot. So we doubled food production, and we tripled the amount of water that we needed to grow that food. So the challenge now is whether we can increase food production, but more efficiently, and whether the new crops will be resource efficient rather than replace resource for inefficient crops.
One of the things that's been observed is that, for example, fertilizers, even water in irrigation are subsidized in many countries. Water might be through subsidizing electricity, for example, for the pumps, indirect subsidies, but nonetheless, you're not getting true cost for these. How do you look to a future in which we may have more sustainable forms of agriculture when we have these perverse subsidies?
Well, in terms of water, we're literally running out. I mean, you can subsidize it as much as you like, but if there's no water in the river and you've drawn down the underground aquifers, you've got to do something. Price is one mechanism by which you might do something, but you'll certainly have to do something. One of the consequences of tripling our use of water for agriculture in the last 40 or 50 years is that many rivers in the world, particularly the dry parts of the world, are literally running out. You go to Central Asia, Middle East. The Middle East 20 or 30 years ago lost the ability to feed itself. It has to import food in a way that it never did before.
Now, you are a Brit. It cannot be denied. You are very supportive of the environment, I think it's fair to say. And yet, unlike many Brits who might fit that description, you have also said, including to me in a missive, that GMOs might come in handy, thinking about the future. Now, what makes you so different from your ilk back in Blighty?
They don't scare me. Or they don't. The typical hierarchy of concern about GMOs is, they're Frankenstein foods. They'll kill us in some unspecified way. Or that they are going to contaminate the natural environment, or a third possibility that they may they give too much power to agribusiness and might damage peasant farmers, and peasant farmers are probably the most vulnerable people in the food system today, so that might not be. But they put them in that order, with Frankenstein foods top. For me, it's the other way around. I am concerned about the power of agribusiness and whether its research agenda, its money-making agenda is going to be consistent with the needs of those who are most vulnerable to food shortages, the least food secure. I'm much less worried about the other stuff.
So we've heard so far, need more tools in the toolkit, not really a shortage of food perhaps, but how it's produced, what impact, if we were to do a life system assessment. Yeah. Let me turn to Prabhu. I know you take a broad global view, certainly with your work at the Gates Foundation, focused on the poorest in the world. We heard mention, of course, of the great Norman Borlaug, who recently passed away. You and I both had the pleasure to know him in Mexico. Can you tell me, what are the lessons from the first Green Revolution, including in things that perhaps we got wrong, and how might it be applied to a place like Africa in a meaningful way, given that local conditions differ?
Great. I actually would like to take off along the same lines as Fred.
Sure.
I also read all the literature in the 60s, 70s about how the world was going to collapse. How...
Come on, in fairness, Stuart Brand has already given a gracious mea culpa earlier on the stage, so enough beating up on that crowd.
Right, but you know, India and China were not supposed to be self-sufficient in food, but they are. And they are because of the Green Revolution. And what did the Green Revolution do? It showed that technology can have a transformative effect, one. But second, that technology is not enough. With the technology, you need massive investments in infrastructure, roads, transport, irrigation infrastructure. And you need a policy environment that provides the incentives for farmers to improve their productivity, price policy, trade policy, etc. And these three things coming together is what made the Green Revolution happen. And as we look at the foundation towards improving smallholder productivity in Africa, that's the lesson that we bring forward. Now, we also learned some lessons about what we should not do. We know today that you don't need the very high levels of water to produce the same amount of yields. There's enormous technologies out there to improve water use efficiency. We know today that you can use much lower levels of fertilizer. We know today that you don't need to use the insecticides for rice. In fact, you can grow a very good rice crop with 0 insecticides. The problem is, what are the ways in which you transfer this information to farmers? It's very knowledge intensive. Farmers need to know a lot more in order to practice much more sustainable farming systems. And the price incentives are not there, as you mentioned, the subsidies. And the political economy behind getting rid of those subsidies is something that none of us have been able to tackle. Not here in the US, not in Europe, and not in India. And that's the big challenge that none of us ever talk about when we talk about the future of agriculture.